It is early 1965. A 22-year-old man named Paul McCartney is, by any reasonable measure, on top of the world. He is the co-songwriter, bass player, and cherubic face of the Beatles, the most famous musical group on Earth. Beatlemania is not just a fad. It is a global psychological event, a roaring, screaming, earth-shaking wave of adoration that follows him and his bandmates everywhere. They are wealthy, they are adored, and they are in the middle of a creative run that is fundamentally changing the sound of popular music. They are, in short, the undisputed kings. But this man, Paul McCartney, is haunted. He is possessed by a secret, a melody that has appeared in his head, and his immediate overriding emotion is not joy, not pride. It is paranoia. He is convinced he is a thief. He has a tune, a complete, perfect, and devastatingly beautiful melody. It is quiet, it is mournful, and it feels old. It feels like something his father, a keen amateur pianist, would have played in the family living room, a classic standard from the 1920s or 30s. He is so certain that this perfect melody is not his that he begins a frantic, month-long quest. He becomes a man possessed, a musical detective, playing this tune for everyone he knows, his bandmates, his producer, music publishers, singers, journalists, anyone who will listen, and asking one simple, desperate question. Have you ever heard this before? This is the secret origin story of Yesterday. It is the unbelievable tale of how one of the most recorded, most performed, and most beloved songs in the history of music was not written in a flash of inspiration, but arrived fully formed in a dream, and was then met not with celebration, but with crippling doubt. It is a story about the mysterious nature of pure, accidental genius, and the paranoia that can come from a gift so perfect, it feels stolen. To understand the strangeness of this song's birth, we must first understand the world the Beatles inhabited in late 1964 and early 1965. This was not a time for quiet introspection. This was the absolute zenith of Beatlemania. The band was a constant, moving storm. Their life was a blur of limousine doors, airplane cabins, screaming crowds, and hotel rooms under siege. The world didn't just listen to the Beatles, it consumed them. They had just completed a grueling world tour, released their third album A Hard Day's Night and its accompanying film to critical and commercial ecstasy, and were immediately thrust into recording their fourth album, Beatles for Sale, to meet the insatiable Christmas market. Beatles for Sale, released in December 1964, is the sound of a tired, overworked band. It's raw, almost weary, filled with exhausted originals like I'm a Loser and gritty R&B covers like Mr. Moonlight and rock and roll music. It was the sound of four men in leather jackets, not four sophisticated balladeers. By early 1965, they were already being hurried into their next project, a second feature film, which would eventually be titled Help. The pressure on the Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership was immense. They were expected to produce a new album's worth of hit singles, seemingly on command. And their sound, up to this point, was defined by electric energy. It was a joyous, driving, and loud combination of American rhythm and blues, rock and roll, and skiffle. Songs like She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and their recent number one, I Feel Fine, with its pioneering use of guitar feedback, were built on driving rhythms, electric guitars, and those famous woos and yeah, yeah, yeahs. The sessions for Help were producing more of the same, albeit with growing sophistication. Ticket to Ride, recorded just before Yesterday was conceived, featured a heavy, almost psychedelic drum pattern from Ringo and a dense, jangling guitar sound. This was the sound of the Beatles in 1965. Loud, electric, and forward-moving. They were a four-headed, perfectly synchronized unit. John, Paul, George, and Ringo. The sound was the sound of the group. There was very little daylight between their individual identities and the singular entity known as the Beatles. Paul McCartney, at this point, was living not in a rock star mansion, but in an attic room at 57 Wimpole Street, the London home of his girlfriend, the actress Jane Asher, and her family. This was a critical detail, perhaps the most important detail in the entire story. The Ashers were not a typical family. They were a wealthy, educated, upper-class family. Her father, Richard Asher, was an eminent physician. Her mother, Margaret Asher, was a professor of oboe at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. Her brother, Peter Asher, was a performer himself, of Peter and Gordon, and deeply connected to the arts. This house was McCartney's sanctuary, his escape from the screaming. But it was also his university. He was a self-taught musician from Liverpool, a brilliant sponge. At Wimpole Street, he was surrounded by culture, classical music, avant-garde theater, and intellectual dinner parties. He was living a true double life. By day, he was a Beatle, dodging thousands of screaming fans, playing loud rock and roll in massive arenas, a god of the new youth culture. By night, he was a quiet guest in a house where his girlfriend's mother taught classical music from the room below his, where intellectual conversation replaced the roar of the crowd, and where he was exposed to a world of art and ideas far removed from the Cavern Club. He was listening to Vivaldi. He was discussing literature. This environment was priming his musical mind, opening up pathways beyond the simple three-chord structure of early rock. He was absorbing, by osmosis, the lessons of classical composition, of harmony, of melody. This dual life extended to his songwriting. For the Beatles, he was co-writing electric hits, but in this house, he and John Lennon had written "I Want to Hold Your Hand" on the piano in the basement. And in this same house, Paul wrote "A World Without Love" for Peter and Gordon, a song that had a slightly more complex, melancholy feel, which became a #1 hit for them. His mind was already working in different lanes. He was a rock god living in an art salon. And in this small attic room, Paul had a piano placed right next to his bed, so he could act on any musical idea that struck him. One morning in early 1965, he woke up, and the melody was just there. It was not a fragment. It was not an idea. It was the entire, complete, fully formed tune, from the first note to the last. He would later describe it as if he had just heard it on the radio in his sleep, as if an orchestra had been playing it in his head. Groggy, half awake, he rolled out of bed and fumbled for the chords on the piano. He found them almost immediately. A G major to an F sharp minor, to a B minor, then an E minor. The progression was sophisticated, moving in a way that none of his previous songs had. It had a classical, almost folk-like quality. He played it again. It was perfect. The melodic leap on the first "Yesterday" was beautiful, the resolution of the melody deeply satisfying. It was, in a word, a standard. And that's when the panic set in. McCartney, a self-taught musician, was part of a generation that had grown up absorbing thousands of songs from the radio, from his father's record collection, from the air itself. His father, Jim McCartney, had been a band leader in the 1920s, and Paul grew up hearing those old Tin Pan Alley standards, songs with complex melodies and sophisticated chord changes. And this new melody felt too good, too familiar, too perfect. He was convinced, absolutely convinced. that his sleeping brain had simply dredged up an old, half-forgotten song from his father's era. He believed he had unconsciously plagiarized it. To a songwriter, this is a known phenomenon. Cryptomnesia, the act of experiencing a forgotten memory as a new inspiration. It's a genuine psychological quirk, where a memory of an old song, or a book, or an idea returns to the conscious mind, but without the tag that identifies it as a memory. It feels, for all the world, like a brand new, original thought. This phenomenon has been the source of countless inadvertent plagiarism lawsuits in music history. But for a songwriter in the biggest band in the world, a band already facing lawsuits over chord progressions from American R&B artists, this was a terrifying thought. To claim this song as his own would be to invite ridicule, to be exposed as a fraud. This paranoia was rooted in his own self-perception. He was a rock and roller, a musician who played by ear. He couldn't read or write a note of music. How could he, a musical illiterate by classical standards, just wake up with a melody that sounded like it was written by Cole Porter or one of the great composers? It felt impossible. It felt like a trap. So Paul McCartney, creator of some of the most original melodies of his time, began his paranoid quest. His first stop was his own bandmate and songwriting partner, John Lennon. He cornered Lennon at a studio or an apartment and played him the tune. "What is this, John? I've heard this before. I must have." Lennon, famously unsentimental and direct, listened and shook his head. "I've never heard it before, Paul," he said. "It's yours. Take it." But Paul didn't believe him. He thought John must be missing something. He went to George Harrison. "George, what is this song?" George, quiet and thoughtful, had no idea. He played it for Ringo. Ringo had never heard it. This only increased McCartney's anxiety. If his bandmates who shared his exact musical DNA didn't know it, it must be more obscure. His next stop was the fifth Beatle, their producer, George Martin. This was the real test. Martin was not a rock and roll producer who got lucky. He was a classically trained musician, an oboist, a composer, and an arranger from the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. He had produced classical records and comedy albums for the Goons. His knowledge of musical history, popular and classical, was encyclopedic. If anyone would know, it would be him. McCartney sat at a piano, played the full melody, and looked up at his producer. "George, what is this?" "I've stolen it. It must be an old standard." Martin listened intently. He analyzed the chord structure, the unusual 7-bar phrasing, a subtle quirk that made it feel less modern, the melodic intervals. He searched his memory. "It's beautiful, Paul," Martin replied, "but I've never heard it. It's not Beethoven, it's not Mozart, it's not Cole Porter. As far as I know, it's yours." This was still not enough. McCartney became, in his own words, like a man possessed. He was a man with a ghost. He took the melody on the road. He played it for everyone. He played it for fellow musicians in the British invasion scene. He played it for music publishers on Denmark Street, London's Tin Pan Alley, the historic heart of the British music publishing industry. We can picture the scene: the most famous pop star on earth, the face of the new generation, walking into these old, dusty offices, humming a tune to old-timers in suits who'd been plugging songs since the war. Men who knew every melody from 1920 to 1950. And every single one of them, these human archives of music, shook their heads. Number. Never heard it. He played it for Alma Cogan, a popular British singer of the day and a friend of the band. "Alma, what is this?" She too had no idea. This process, this obsessive plagiarism tour, went on for weeks, possibly even a month or more. The song became a running joke within the Beatles' inner circle. It was this beautiful, perfect, nameless tune that Paul was driving everyone mad with. "Here he comes," John would sigh. "It's that Yesterday song again." He's still trying to find someone who wrote it. During the filming of Help, Paul would reportedly sit at any available piano on set and play the melody, searching for an answer. It reached a point where the film's director, Richard Lester, was driven to distraction. He finally snapped, "Paul, if you play that bloody song one more time, I'm having the piano taken off the stage." To preserve the melody, to park it so he wouldn't forget it, McCartney did what he often did. He wrote temporary, placeholder lyrics. These dummy lyrics were often the first, most ridiculous thing that came to mind. The first line he came up with, sitting at a breakfast table with Jane Asher, was as absurd as the melody was sublime. The working title for this mournful, sophisticated ballad became Scrambled Eggs. And so, for over a month, one of the most beautiful melodies ever conceived was known to the world's biggest pop group by the lyric, Scrambled Eggs. "Oh my baby, how I love your legs, not as much as I love scrambled eggs." This phase of the song's creation is a fascinating window into the creative process. It shows the absurd disconnect between the divine and the mundane. A melody plucked from the ether, a gift from the subconscious, was now tethered to a breakfast food. But this absurdity served a purpose. It was a genuine songwriting technique for McCartney. By creating placeholder words, he could sing the melody, play with its phrasing, and keep it active in his mind. It separated the musical creation from the lyrical creation. He wasn't trying to do both at once. He had secured the melody, given it a silly name, and now he could wait for the real words to show up, the words that fit the emotion. This two-step process was a mark of his burgeoning, methodical craftsmanship. Even in the midst of creative chaos, he tried to write real lyrics, but nothing would come. How do you write words for a melody that feels like it has always existed? He was blocked. The song was a beautiful, empty vessel. He knew scrambled eggs wasn't it. But every serious attempt felt forced, unequal to the music. The breakthrough finally came, as it so often did, under pressure and on the move. In late May 1965, the Beatles were set to fly to Portugal for a short vacation. Paul was driving from London to Albufeira to meet his friend Bruce Welch of the Shadows. It was a long, hot, dusty drive through Spain, a journey of many hours. He was in the back of the car, half asleep, his acoustic guitar in his lap. His mind was idle, the rhythm of the road lulling him, and the word just came to him. One single word that fit the melody's opening 3 notes perfectly. Yesterday. It was the key. It was the scrambled eggs replacement that had eluded him for weeks. As soon as he had it, the rest of the song tumbled out, almost as fully formed as the melody had been. Yesterday, all my troubles seemed so far away. The word yesterday was a perfect vehicle for the melody's inherent sadness. It was a song of longing, a song of regret. It was no longer about breakfast, it was about loss. It was about a sudden, inexplicable break. Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me. The lyrics are simple, conversational, but they carry an immense weight of sadness. This was a new kind of writing for McCartney. It was not, "She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah." It was not, "I want to hold your hand." It was a deeply personal, first-person lament. The song structure itself is a marvel of economy and craft. It's a 32-bar AABA form, classic Tin Pan Alley structure, but the 7-bar phrases make it feel slightly off-kilter, adding to the sense of unease. Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say. For years, critics and fans have speculated about the source of this sudden melancholy. The song is ostensibly about a romantic breakup, a universal theme. But McCartney himself has suggested its roots may go much, much deeper. His mother, Mary McCartney, had died suddenly of an embolism following an operation for breast cancer when Paul was just 14. It was a shattering, defining loss for him and his brother, Michael. His father, Jim, was heartbroken. The family, in the typical stiff upper lip style of the 1950s working class, didn't talk about it. They buried their grief. They carried on. Paul threw himself into music, his guitar becoming his shield and his outlet. He has theorized that this song, Arriving in a Dream, was his subconscious finally processing that decade-old grief. The simple, almost childlike words of loss. I said something wrong, now I long for yesterday. Could be the voice of a young boy trying to understand why his mother was suddenly gone, wondering if he had done something, said something, to cause this terrible, unexplainable event. It's the magical thinking of a grieving child. The shadow hanging over him was not a recent breakup, but a grief that had never been fully expressed. The song, in this light, becomes a delayed act of mourning, a conversation with a ghost, delivered by his subconscious, disguised as a simple tune about love. The song was no longer scrambled eggs. It was yesterday, and it was, after his long and paranoid investigation, finally, definitively, his. When he returned to London, he brought the finished song to the Beatles. The band was at Abbey Road Studios in June 1965, recording tracks for what would become the Help album. Paul sat down, likely with his Epiphone Texan acoustic guitar, and played it for them. There was a moment of silence. This was not a Beatles song. It had no driving drums for Ringo. It had no jangly rhythm guitar for John. It had no intricate electric lead for George. It was a solo piece. John, George, and Ringo, with their typical pragmatic, no-nonsense attitude, essentially said, "It's great, Paul. But what do you want us to do? Ringo, you want to play a shuffle beat? It doesn't need it. We can't play on it. It's not for us." John Lennon later joked, "I was in the bathroom, and he came out with this song. I told him he should call it Scrambled Eggs." This was a pivotal moment. It was the first time a Beatle had brought in a song that was so complete, so personal, that it didn't fit the band's four-piece rock and roll formula. It was, in effect, the first ever solo Paul McCartney record, recorded during a Beatles session. It was the beginning of the end of the four-headed monster, and the beginning of their emergence as four distinct artists. This is where George Martin, the band's producer, stepped in. His classical training and his open-minded approach to production made him the perfect person to handle this delicate situation. He recognized the song's profound, classical beauty. He knew it didn't need a rock arrangement. "Paul," Martin suggested, "this is a beautiful song, but it's not a Beatles track. Let me score a string arrangement for it. A string quartet, perhaps." McCartney, the rock and roller, was horrified. "Oh no, George," he recoiled. "You're not doing that. We're a rock and roll band. A string quartet? That's old-fashioned. That's my dad's music. That's Mantovani." Mantovani, the Italian-British conductor, was famous for his cascading strings, the epitome of easy-listening schmaltz. For Paul, It was the absolute opposite of the raw, electric energy the Beatles stood for. He was terrified of it sounding syrupy and deeply uncool. George Martin, ever the gentleman, was persistent. "Look, Paul, let's try it. I won't use any vibrato. I'll have the strings play it straight, very clean and modern sounding. Let me write a very classical arrangement. If you don't like it when it's done, we won't use it. We'll just scrap it and you can do it with your acoustic guitar. What have we got to lose?" This was the compromise. Paul, trusting his producer, agreed, nervously. He even sat with Martin at the piano, contributing ideas. Although Paul couldn't read or write music, he could hum the lines he wanted. He suggested the soaring cello line in the second verse, which Martin then transcribed and harmonized. This was a new form of collaboration, the pop genius and the classical translator. On June 14, 1965, McCartney walked into Abbey Road's cavernous Studio 2 alone. George Martin had arranged for a classical string quartet, the Medici Quartet, to be there. Paul sat on a stool in the middle of the vast room, his Epiphone Texan acoustic guitar in his lap. He had tuned his guitar down a whole step, from E to D, so the chords he was playing, which were G-shaped chords, actually sounded in the key of F major. This gave the guitar a richer, more resonant, and slightly softer tone. He played the song. The quartet, 2 violins, a viola, and a cello, added Martin's spare, beautiful arrangement. The cello line, in particular, with its gentle, walking counter-melody in the second verse, was a touch of genius, adding a layer of sophisticated sadness without ever becoming sentimental. They recorded it in just 2 takes. It was done. When they played it back, McCartney was reportedly stunned into silence. It was perfect. It was exactly what the song needed. It was not schmaltzy. It was timeless. The rock and roller from Liverpool had, with the help of his classical-minded producer, created a masterpiece that transcended genre. But the song's journey was still not over. The Beatles themselves, as a unit, were still deeply ambivalent about it. They were proud of the song, but they were also protective of their image. This quiet, sad, string-laden ballad was so profoundly different from their raucous, joyful public persona that they were afraid of what it would do to their brand. Their solution was a strange one. When the Help album was released in the United Kingdom in August 1965, Yesterday was on it, tucked away as the second-to-last track on side 2. But it was not released as a single. The band, particularly John Lennon, felt it was too soft, too Paul, and not representative of the Beatles. They didn't want it defining them on the radio. They were a rock band. In the UK, singles were seen as distinct artistic statements, and they chose the double-sided rock assault of Help and I'm Down instead. Their American label, Capitol Records, had absolutely no such fears. They heard the song for what it was, a gigantic, undeniable monster hit. They didn't care about artistic purity. They cared about selling records. And they knew this song would sell to everyone, kids, teenagers, and for the first time, their parents. In September 1965, against the band's wishes, Capitol Records released Yesterday as a single in the United States. The result was an avalanche. The song's success was immediate and overwhelming. It shot to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and stayed there for 4 solid weeks. It dominated American radio. It wasn't just a hit, it was an event. It instantly changed the public's perception of the Beatles. They weren't just mop-tops singing, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." They were sophisticated, mature artists capable of creating music of profound, classical beauty. And then, the covers started. This was the true measure of its power. Yesterday wasn't just a pop hit. It was a standard. It was a song that could be reinterpreted by anyone in any style. Its melody was so strong, its emotional core so pure, that it worked as a jazz ballad, a soul anthem, a country lament, or an orchestral piece. Within a year of its release, hundreds of artists had recorded their own versions. Matt Monro released a lush orchestral version. Andy Williams, Perry Como, and Pat Boone all recorded it. Jazz artists like Sarah Vaughan and Count Basie did versions. Soul artists like Marvin Gaye and Ray Charles recorded it, finding their own pain in its melody. Country artists like Willie Nelson made it their own. And, in what was perhaps the ultimate seal of approval, Frank Sinatra called it the greatest song of the last 50 years and began performing it live. The avalanche of statistics that followed is staggering. The Guinness Book of World Records would eventually name Yesterday the most covered song in history, with estimates ranging from 2,000 to over 3,000 different recorded versions. It has been performed, according to broadcast data, over 7 million times on American radio and television alone. The song that Paul McCartney was afraid to claim, the song he thought was a stolen, half-remembered melody, the song he called Scrambled Eggs for a month, had become, in less than a year, the most universal song of its time. What does the story of Yesterday tell us? It's a profound examination of the very nature of creativity. It challenges the myth of the struggling artist, toiling in obscurity. This was a song that required no toil. It was a gift, delivered whole from the subconscious. It proved that genius isn't always about hard work. Sometimes it's about being open enough, and perhaps well-rested enough, to simply receive the idea. It also tells us about Paul McCartney himself, his immediate reaction of paranoia, his certainty that he was a thief, speaks to a deep, underlying humility, perhaps even an insecurity. Despite being in the biggest band in the world, he couldn't quite believe that he, a self-taught rock and roller from Liverpool, could be capable of creating something so perfect, so seemingly timeless. He needed the validation of his peers and his mentors before he could accept his own genius. The song also marked a monumental moment for the Beatles. It was the first crack in their unified facade. It was a solo song released under the group's name, a precedent that would lead to the individual fragmented brilliance of the White Album, and eventually to their breakup. But in 1965, it was a breakthrough. It gave the band permission to grow beyond the four-piece rock format. Without the permission that Yesterday granted, would Paul have had the confidence to bring in Eleanor Rigby just a year later, a song with no Beatles playing on it, only a string octet? Would George have felt free to bring in his Indian classical musicians for Love You Too? Would John have felt free to experiment with the tape loops of Tomorrow Never Knows? Yesterday was the song that broke the mold, proving that the Beatles was not a single sound, but a creative umbrella for four distinct and brilliant artists. Today, Yesterday is more than just a song. It's a global standard, a piece of music that almost everyone on the planet knows. It is a song of pure, distilled melancholy, a universal expression of longing for a simpler time. Its power lies in its simplicity. The lyrics are conversational, the melody unforgettable. It's a song that feels like it has always existed, which is exactly what its creator thought when he first woke up with it in his head. It is the ultimate story of accidental genius, a 400-second masterpiece plucked from a dream, a ghost of a song that haunted its creator until he finally had the courage to claim it as his own. If you enjoy these deep examinations of music history, These secret origin stories behind the songs you thought you knew, this is what we do. We unpack the legends, find the truth, and tell the stories behind the music. Subscribe to our channel because there are so many more stories to tell.